Whenever we talk about ancient humans, we always ask the exact same majestic questions. How did they invent fire? How did they hunt massive mammoths? But there is one giant, incredibly awkward question that nobody ever dares to ask. Where exactly did cavemen poop? We naturally assume that early humans were just like wild animals, simply dropping their business wherever they stood, directly on the cave floor. But if you think our ancestors just squatted in the corner of their prehistoric living room, you are completely wrong. In fact, if a prehistoric tribe actually treated their campsite like a giant, open-air toilet, the entire group would have been completely wiped out by disease and deadly predators in a matter of weeks. Get ready to dive into the most highly guarded, slightly disgusting, but absolutely fascinating secret of human survival, because the wild history of the prehistoric toilet is going to blow your mind. If you walk through a lush forest today and see a pile of deer droppings, it is honestly not a big deal. Herbivore waste is basically just compacted, digested grass. It dries out quickly and decomposes harmlessly into the soil. However, human feces is a completely different, highly dangerous biological story. Because our ancient ancestors were opportunistic omnivores who scavenged for wild meat, hunted animals, and ate a massive variety of unpredictable foods, their waste was essentially a highly toxic biological weapon. Human poop is absolutely packed with deadly microscopic enemies. It is a thriving playground for lethal bacteria, microscopic pathogens, and horrifying intestinal parasites like massive tapeworms. If a prehistoric family decided to be lazy and use the immediate area inside their cozy cave as a bathroom, the results would be catastrophically fast. The toxic bacteria would rapidly contaminate their sleeping mats, infect their primitive tools, and inevitably end up in their food supply. Without modern antibiotics or basic hand sanitizer, a simple outbreak of dysentery or cholera would aggressively dehydrate and kill an entire thriving tribe in a matter of a few brutal days. Therefore, practicing strict waste management was not just about basic manners. It was the ultimate, non-negotiable rule of biological survival. But microscopic bacteria were not the only massive threat lurking in the shadows. We have to remember that prehistoric humans lived in a terrifying world, completely surrounded by massive, bloodthirsty apex predators. Giant cave bears, packs of aggressive dire wolves, and massive saber-toothed cats were constantly patrolling the dense wilderness, looking for an easy, fleshy snack. In the brutal animal kingdom, scent is everything. The strong, pungent, lingering odor of a fresh pile of human waste is basically a giant, neon restaurant sign for hungry predators. It loudly broadcasts exactly where you are, how many of you there are, and how long ago you were standing there. If a careless caveman left a stinky surprise right outside the cave entrance, he was effectively inviting a massive, 1,000-pound bear directly into his living room for a midnight dinner. To stay alive, ancient humans had to completely eliminate their biological scent, forcing them to become absolute masters of hiding their daily waste from the terrifying monsters of the Stone Age. Because going to the bathroom anywhere near their living space was a guaranteed death sentence, ancient humans were forced to invent the very first, highly strict rules of prehistoric urban planning. Long before the invention of paved roads, farming, or permanent cities, early hunter-gatherers had a crystal-clear understanding of zoning laws. Archaeological evidence from ancient campsites reveals that early human tribes, and even our burly Neanderthal cousins, meticulously organized their living spaces into distinct functional areas. They had specific zones for sleeping, separate zones for butchering meat, distinct areas for making stone tools, and, most importantly, a heavily guarded, specific location entirely dedicated to going to the bathroom. This prehistoric bathroom was never placed randomly. To ensure the survival of the entire tribe, the designated toilet area had to meet three absolute non-negotiable geographical conditions. First, it had to be located significantly far away from the main campsite to ensure the terrible smell did not attract hungry apex predators to their sleeping families. Second, the tribe's leaders had to carefully calculate the direction of the wind. The latrine zone was strictly placed downwind, guaranteeing that the highly offensive odors would blow far away into the deep wilderness, rather than drifting back into their cozy cave. Finally, and perhaps most crucially, the primitive latrine absolutely had to be located downstream from their primary drinking water source. Our ancient ancestors somehow intuitively understood that mixing human waste with their fresh drinking supply was a catastrophic recipe for instant death. When they visited these designated bathroom zones, they did not just leave their business sitting out in the open. Much like a modern domestic cat, they actively practiced burying their waste. By digging small holes in the dirt or covering their feces with thick layers of sand, heavy rocks, and dense dirt, they successfully trapped the toxic bacteria, completely masked the dangerous scent from wild animals, and kept their prehistoric neighborhood shockingly sanitary. So, we have established that prehistoric humans were incredibly smart about exactly where they went to the bathroom, but that still leaves us with the most uncomfortable, prickly question of all. How exactly did they wipe? Modern humans are absolutely spoiled by luxurious, ultra-soft, 3-ply toilet paper and heated electronic bidets. If you suddenly transported a modern person back to the Stone Age, they would probably have a complete panic attack the moment they needed to use the prehistoric restroom. But our resilient ancient ancestors did not need a grocery store aisle dedicated to paper products. They simply utilized whatever brilliant solutions Mother Nature provided in their immediate environment. The most obvious assumption is that early humans simply grabbed a handful of leaves. While this is partially true, it required a massive amount of botanical knowledge. Grabbing a random, itchy, or highly toxic leaf, like prehistoric poison ivy, to wipe your most sensitive biological areas would be an agonizing, potentially life-threatening mistake. Instead, forest-dwelling tribes preferred to use something much safer and far more comfortable: thick, damp patches of vibrant green moss. Moss is incredibly soft, highly absorbent, and naturally holds moisture, making it the absolute perfect prehistoric equivalent of a refreshing, soothing wet wipe. However, humans who lived in entirely different climates had to get much more creative. If a tribe lived near a rushing river or a salty ocean coastline, leaves and moss were often replaced by smooth, water-polished river stones or empty, rounded clamshells. While scraping yourself clean with a cold, hard rock sounds like absolute torture to a modern human, a perfectly smooth stone was actually a highly effective, sanitary, and reusable tool for a tough caveman. Meanwhile, for the incredibly brave tribes surviving the freezing, brutal winters of the Ice Age, the solution was chilling but highly hygienic. They simply grabbed a compact handful of fresh, powdery white snow. It was essentially the world's very first, shockingly cold, ice-powered bidet. Ultimately, early humans proved that you do not need a modern factory to stay fresh. You just need to be incredibly resourceful, deeply understand your local environment, and maybe have a high tolerance for cold rocks. It is incredibly ironic that the stinky waste our ancient ancestors desperately tried to bury and hide is now considered an absolute scientific treasure. Today, modern archaeologists actively hunt for fossilized prehistoric poop, officially known as coprolites. These ancient droppings are literal time capsules that perfectly reveal exactly what early humans ate, what parasites they fought, and how they survived. So, the next time you sit comfortably on your warm, automatically flushing porcelain throne with ultra-soft toilet paper, take a moment to thank your ancestors for their brilliant hygiene skills. And be incredibly grateful you are not using a freezing cold river stone. If you enjoyed this wild and slightly gross journey into the past, smash that like button and subscribe for more mind-blowing historical truths. Keep wondering, keep learning, and as always, stay simply ancient.